Okay, so Daniel Blackshields, thank you.
Nice. Thank you very much. Watch me ruin Mike's ability to get us on time. Thanks very much. I was thinking, well, it was always terrible being the graveyard teacher for number one. It's nearly 5 o'clock. Number two, all the interesting things have already been said already. But it got worse today when Stephen was talking, and that actually most of us are brain dead at this stage anyway. And even worse than that, while he was talking, and he was talking about the examination hall and the issues in the examination hall and performance being affected, some may know that my other role is in the appeals officer for UCC, and Mike is in the exams committee, and we took a right smile at one another and watched our workload exponentially grow. So I was thinking about this. I won't stick to time, so Catherine down there is going to tell me shut up. So normally I'm just going to stop, basically, when time is time. I was thinking about what I might be able to contribute to a forum like this. And as usual, I normally kind of go back to one of my great teachers, and it would seem that Stephen shares a similar philosophy, and that's my daughter Elmay, who's 7. And she normally teaches me much that is of importance, because she stops me in my tracks. She stops me from my way of thinking, and how is she looking at this, or what's this about? And I was thinking about something that occurred during the summer. And during the summer, I was teaching on a CERTL program, a summer school for lecturers from China, and there was a couple of people from Peru as well. And this is normally the way. I normally phone home afterwards just to see how things are, and her mum and herself tearing each other's hair out or whatever. And normally Elise answers the phone and says, "Oh, Dad, what were you doing?" "Well, I was teaching people from China and Peru today." To which she said, "Peru?" I said, "Yes, Peru. Were they," wait for it, "human beings?" And I momentarily stopped, of course. What a strange question. And then paused myself and said, "Well, hang on a second. Why is a 7-year-old asking this? Why has this become? Give it reason. Give it say that, no, this is a sensible question." And of course, she's 7. She loves to read. That's her experience. So when she hears Peru, this is what she sees. Why wouldn't she? Paddington Bear. Because guess where Paddington Bear is from? And all Ellie Mae, as a 7-year-old, knows is that bears who talk and eat marmalade live in Peru, and they have a home for retired bears in Lima. And that's as much as her knowledge brings us. Now the interesting thing, of course, when you look at that is, we can't just catapult our knowledge and our experience to her. We have to start from where she's at and bring and complicate her way of thinking that yes, there are talking bears in Peru, but that's in fiction, love, and there's another place called Peru as well. And when I was thinking about this in the context of pedagogy, terrible word, teaching and learning, whatever, strategies, and spaces or learning spaces, I was thinking in terms of, well, what do we attend to? What's the source of our intentions and attentions as teachers, as administrators, as designers, as students? I was thinking about if we really want to see where all of these new possibilities and new ways of thinking, both in terms of teaching and learning strategies and in terms of space, may bring us, we have to actually firstly discover, how do we attend to this social field called teaching and learning? How do we look at this world as a teacher, as a designer, as an administrator, as a student? And to ask ourselves and to realize that what we know of oneself, right? We only know oneself to the extent that we know the world, and one becomes aware of oneself only within the world. And crucially, every object, well contemplated, potentially opens up a new organ of perception within us. Now, why I was thinking about this was, and Mike had touched on it earlier on, is when we start thinking about teaching and learning strategies, and we start thinking about the idea of learning spaces, and we look at all the research that's going on with all this, in many ways, yes, they're like lovers, and they're lovers involved in a dance. If we look at pedagogy, many of the more constructivist pedagogies that are out there now, the more popular ones, whether it be integrative learning or transformational learning or teaching for understanding or problem-based learning or assessment as learning, seem to have three principles, three through lines. One, the idea is learning is becoming personalized. We're moving away from the kind of mass consumer type education where everybody learned the same stuff and the stuff was downloaded to them. And it's becoming more personalized. It's about developing the students, not only their competencies, their knowledge and skills, but their capacities and crucially then their capabilities, who they are becoming. It's about participation, individual and crucially, as we've heard again in many, many occasions, collaboratively. That the student is engaged themselves, with their peers, with their teachers. And that, of course, leads to performance, most potentially, of course, authentic performance, authentic assessment, authentic stuff, not just activities, that is going to bring them to some place where they develop the self, who they are and who they are becoming. So a lot of learning, or a lot of the literature on learning and teaching of learning seems to be about movement and seems to be about getting people beyond the idea of getting it to the realization that how to learn, and as other people have said today, love it, be embraced by it, be seduced by learning. Seduced by learning for what purpose? Not some sort of an epistemological purpose, i.e. the theories of knowledge and developing that, but rather ontological, the idea of theory of the self, being, who you are becoming. Now in a sense that that's the case, learning is starting to be at least written about, or at least in terms of what we call in business. I see that Mike again, reference Chris Agus and Donald Sean speak of the idea of espoused theory, what we talk about. And then there's of course the theory in use, what our practice actually tells us about what we value. But we seem to be saying that learning is a personal creative act for the student as learner. But of course, if we're not to leave it to chance, then the teacher has a key role in how they design, how they reflect, how they reframe and redesign that learning environment so that the student can engage in a personal creative act. And if we start thinking about our other part of our lover, learning space, tends to, at least in the literature that I've read, and I'm no expert in the area, tends to kind of break down to two, something called physical space. Again, as Mike said, a lot of the literature is on about the online, but the physical space and the artifacts within it. And of course, technology. And again, what was said about technology, the idea that we often sort of narrow our idea or a mental model of technology to being this, when of course a pencil is technology and how we use it. When we start thinking about learning space, it was interesting. I was listening to Michael and Mark in particular as people who were designers coming into some buildings and estates, and was listening to the language they were using. It often seems to be, think of the spaces in terms of the behaviour you want and then change the space. And there seems to be a kind of a linear process into schematics and all that. What are the competencies we want? What is the pedagogy that will lead to those competencies? What is the assessment that will be able to show us whether that pedagogy is being achieved? And then, what's the physical and technological environments? Or, as often is the case, technology and then the physical environment. So it often seems to be that the space is seen as a supportive role, not necessarily an equal partner in this dance, but is supporting pedagogy. And as other people have said, sometimes then the discussions in teaching and learning, something that I've researched now for over 10 years, is devoid of any conversation of the spaces that may impact on the ability to achieve what you're trying to achieve. And when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about Gregory Bateson. He's a philosopher. He speaks about, do we ever think about our hands? Often when we think about our hands, we think about the digits, our fingers. You can see them. But as he's argued, in many ways, it's the spaces between the digits, the relationship between the digits, the relationship between the fingers, the opposable thumb, there, which is most important. Because if our hand was designed like this, how different our world would be. So when I was thinking about this in the context of pedagogy or teaching and learning strategy and the idea of space, I'm always wondering, do the teaching and learning people look at their digits? Do the space people look at their digits? And do we only oftentimes, in an espoused way as opposed to a theory in use, and we are a living example of it today, talk about the relationships between the two. And that, is it that, in that relationship, the space is a supporting partner? Or are they real lovers? We're in the creative zone. I teach creativity. The last thing you should have for creativity is lines of chairs like this. So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about our relationship, the teaching and learning strategies, the teaching space. I wonder, are we more like this? Are we lovers that have covers over us? Do we have blind spots? And that blind spot is, what are our intentions and what are our intentions? Not what we say in strategy documents. Not what we say in our schematics, but what we do and how we do it. And more particularly, where we're coming from when we are doing it. One of my favorite short films, which I use an awful lot when I'm exploring, I do scenario analysis with my master's students. John has come in many times, and Catherine indeed, to work with me on them. And I also do my problem solving classes in economics, and I use the music box by Lauren Hardy. And in the music box in Lauren Hardy are charged with bringing a music box to a particular destination. And they meet a postman. He says, oh yeah, it's up there. This stoop, by the way, if you go to LA, is still a landmark. So the music box won an Oscar in 1932. Do they show some knowledge and skill in trying to get the music box up the steps? Absolutely. Do they show capacity? Absolutely. Resilience, their personality in terms of their resilience, their motivation to get there is phenomenal. But they get to the top eventually after going down 3 or 4 times. And they get to the top and they meet the postman again. And the postman says to them, did you just bring that all the way up there? Yes. You didn't have to do that. You see that road down there? You just could have followed that road up there and you could have gotten here. To which Hardy responds, oh, why didn't we think of that? Now, what was interesting was more profound there again. It wasn't necessarily a knowledge problem. They could have found the knowledge out. They got a way of thinking that the environment was only one way. This is the environment. So we've got to embed in this environment. We have to move through this environment. And they got stuck in a mental model, a mindset. And crucial, what happened with that, of course, is when they came to the bottom of the stairs first, they came in a horse and cart. But because all they saw were the steps, the horse and cart were not seen as resources. It was a blind spot for them. Because the environment was seen in a particular way. If we want to reveal the masks as teachers, administrators, students, designers, and all other stakeholders that are engaged in learning, if we're taking learning out of the idea of the classroom, we firstly have to start not with our rhetoric, though that's important, but seeing how we see. Not again in what we're saying, but in what we see. Why was this room designed the way it was? Why were the chairs put that way? It's so easy to slip back into our old routines because they're embedded in us. They're mental models. We very rarely investigate our mental models. And to see, our seeing is, we have to have an open mind. What assumptions are we making? What assumptions do we make about students? What assumptions do we make about designers or teachers? Come at it with an open heart. Be willing to get over our immunities to change, whatever they may be, and then have an open will to drive on. Always remember, big fan of David Bohm, the quantum physicist. The observer is not separated from the object observed. Our spaces, our teaching and learning activities, our teaching and learning strategies are social constructions. And oftentimes they're social constructions that we are thrown into. Here's the curriculum, go teach it. Here's the space, go use it. It's there, we're thrown into it. And oftentimes, what's the easiest thing to do, as happened today? We slip into our routine. So what have you become today? Passive consumers. In a conference that is about getting out of being passive. And what's happening? The space is forcing you to be that passive consumer. When I start thinking about how we might reveal those masks, and so the lovers become equal partners, I think what you think about when we're thinking about being as teachers, or being as students, or being as designers, that we don't exist alongside one another. We don't exist alongside objects, and we don't exist alongside others. We are in significant relationships with one another. And those significant relationships with one another are caused by our interactions with one another. We are not teachers without students. We are not teachers without teaching tools. We are not teachers without institutions. We are a system. If we forget that we are a system, if we abstract away from that and say we're only going to look at teaching and learning and we're only going to look at space, it's always a blind spot. We are being in the world. The problem with being in the world, of course, is when you inhabit a world, it's very hard to see how you are seeing that world. You're just acting. And you can slip into what Heidegger calls an inauthentic way of being. He doesn't mean that in a pejorative way. We all have to follow customs and rules and so forth. But an inauthentic way is to inhabit the world in a customary way. It is what it is. And we just move on. An authentic way is to open up the possibilities through our involvement in the world. To be aware, to be willing to experiment, to appreciate that we don't necessarily have all the answers, or we don't necessarily always have to follow the rules. There might be ways and reasons to bend them. There's an issue with that. It'll depend on our values, our expectations, our previous experiences. Every one of our actions that we engage in is embedded in a mental model. A mental model about who we are as VP for Teaching and Learning, who we are as a lecturer, who we are as an administrator. Even those terms, which we are trying to shake out of them, of course. We don't call administrators call them professional. But now we have the other things. Does that mean we're amateurs? No, we don't call them students anymore. Call them learners. Don't call us lecturers anymore. Call us teachers. Call us facilitators. Yeah, there's language, and that's really important. But does it go any deeper? Because embedded in all of our mental models are embedded in containers, and those containers are our deepest held values and beliefs. And again, as I say, even the way that this room is configured today tells us what our deepest values and beliefs are. So what I'm suggesting is linearity, and certainly this idea that in some shape or form space is subservient or supportive only of pedagogy, rather than in a dance, where at any one time either partner may take the lead key role, is key to change that metaphor. And my idea is, like again David Bohm, that when we are working as teaching and learning experts or as designers or students, that we're coming at it through the idea of folding, enfolding, unfolding. The idea of a continuous learning loop of theory, perception, action, and not getting stuck. For that to happen, I think we've got to take deep dive learning journeys together. And what I mean by a deep dive learning journey is not to stand up here and say, if I was a student, this is what I think. If I was a designer, this is what I think, and if I was a teacher, this is what I would think. But rather, and not ask them, not observe them, be them. The best way for anybody who's done the teaching and learning cert, what is the one thing that as often comes out of that? It was amazing to see things through the eyes of a student again. Because you're living as a student. You're experiencing things as a student. Just as simple as deadlines. Jesus, will I get an extension? The things that irritate us as lecturers, we just get it done. Total immersion. Because in total immersion, what you do is you start to see what is your familiar world in unfamiliar ways. And in seeing it in unfamiliar ways, you get to see what it is to see the world through those eyes. And that has an impact on what we design and why we design it. It will give us humility, it will give us modesty in our claims, it will give us accountability, and crucially, it will take us out of our experience, but expands the possibility of our imagination. We're in Cork. A couple of weeks' time is the Jazz Festival. For me, the idea of there being a leader orchestrating all the little bits and pieces is not going to release our blind spots or provide us with the opportunity to see potentiality. And what I mean by that is, again, I think Mark or Michael has said it, we didn't even think about what they were going to use that space for. That for me is jazz. Improvisation, improvus, not seen ahead of time. Jazz improvisators are performing and experimenting at the same time. They are discovering the rationale of what they're doing as they are working. They don't know where their queries are going to lie and how the action will unfold. They're experimenting constantly. And there are a number of organizational characteristics to jazz improvisation. 1, minimal structures to engender maximum flexibility. Now, I don't mean by structure just necessarily, obviously, the artifacts in the physical place, the rules, the regulations, the way we think. Provocative competence. A jazz musician will always just play the notes slightly different than they did before, just to see what would happen. My favourite example of that is sometimes I put my lecture slides on continuous loop, and I sit down amongst the students, and they're chatting away, and about 3 minutes in, somebody might go, has the lecture started? I said, I don't know. What's a lecture? Just provoke them. Embrace errors as source of learning. I heard about it. Don't have a perfect space. Don't have a perfect pedagogy. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as we know what all the competencies are going to be. Everything that's telling us in the world of business that a lot of our kids will be working in businesses in 5 and 10 years' time that haven't even been created yet. What are we doing creating perfection now? It'll be imperfect by next year. Embrace errors, in inverted commas, as a source of learning. Where will this bring us? Alternate between soloing and supporting. The best jazz group, main guy doesn't take over all the time. He comps. Sometimes the designers need to take the lead. Sometimes the students need to take the lead. Sometimes the lecturers need to take the lead. And sometimes they need to follow and know what it is to follow. And hang out. Hang out, we spoke today about the idea of being in communities of practice. Hang out as a community of learners from all our different perspectives and take that deep dive learning journey together. Otherwise, we may get stuck in our mental models. And always remember this. No matter how much knowledge and skill we are introduced to, like my daughter here next to Boo. If Crewe is a place where only talking bears with marmalade come from, well, that's how we'll still see the world. For me, take what Miles Davis says. Don't play what's there. Play what's not there. Thank you. Sorry, my music.
Great. That's the last time I'm going to